Mr. President, I believe we're all here and ready to begin. Brian, you're muted, but that's okay.
Okay, I had to pull up the agenda, so I actually know what the heck we're talking about. So we will call a meeting to order of the May 11th Redevelopment Commission meeting, and the first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the April 13th meeting. I have a motion.
There are no questions. I would move to approve.
I would second that.
Thank you, Jason. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Thank you very much. Dropping down to economic development area updates. Bill?
Mr. President, if we may, the last item, or one of the last items on the agenda under additional business, item A is St. Joseph County Comprehensive Plan Project Request for Funding. Abby Wiles is on the call. She has another meeting she's trying to balance, and we wonder if we could move that agenda to the front, please.
Does anyone have an issue with that? I certainly do not.
I do not.
Sounds good.
Go ahead.
Hello, sorry, I raised my hand because I was having trouble unmuting myself. Thank you for moving me up on the agenda. I'm sorry, I do not mean to be a diva, but I have a conflict also at this time, so I appreciate you working with me on that. So last December, the Redevelopment Commission passed a resolution committing financial support to the new comprehensive plan for St. Joe County. On February 2nd of this year, the Board of Commissioners approved the release, and a total of 12 proposals were received for consideration on March 16th. After proposals were received, we formed a selection committee to read the proposals for them and interview the top firms. We've gone through that process, and the selection committee is in the final stages of making their recommendation to the Board of Commissioners for the final consultant, but that has not yet been finalized. So I am here before you to request the actual appropriation of $250,000. In December, you approved it as part of your budgeting process, but didn't actually appropriate the funds, and that's what the request is today. I just want to note that Brian participated on the selection committee in reading and interviewing the top firms on behalf of the Redevelopment Commission, since you all have skin in the game, and was a tremendous asset to the whole process. And I would give him the opportunity to weigh in or provide any other comments as well. So thank you very much for your consideration, and happy to answer any questions.
Who was chosen?
I'd take any questions that the commissioners have. I just say that Abby really created a very nice process that allowed not only the commission, but the council, as well as staff from the county to really participate in the process. And I was, frankly, having done a little bit of comprehensive planning work at the city, I was surprised at the number of proposals we got and the level of thoroughness. I mean, there were a lot of companies and firms really chomping at the bit to get in the game here. And so that was great because that level of competition, I think, really gave us more options than we otherwise would have had. And we kind of narrowed down to a few, did on-site interviews there in the council chambers, and we're able to do back and forth questions, listen to presentations, ask more targeted, pointed questions. And I just thought it was a very well-run process, Abby, so thank you for that. And if there are any other questions the commission has, I'd be happy to share.
Can you describe what the process will be, Brian?
Will be going forward?
As they create the plan.
So maybe I'll defer to Abby, but essentially the top firms, there was a range of between 12 to 18 months of time frame there for the entire comprehensive plan. So that's, I think, beginning kind of data gathering, stakeholder engagement, all the way through to kind of zoning recommendations, changes, stuff like that, way down at the end of the line. But Abby, what more might you say about that?
Yeah, so as part of the request for proposals, when we drafted that, we stated from the beginning that we wanted to have a steering committee for this process. So we have, folks oftentimes would get the two confused. We had the selection committee, that we formed to read the proposals, score, interview, and make a recommendation to the commissioners. And then we'll have a steering committee for the process that will be a lot broader than the selection committee, basically providing input on an ongoing basis to the consultant as they prepare for public engagement, and as a sounding board to really ground their recommendations as we go along the way. So they'll work with a steering committee and staff. We'll have public participation. There will be a virtual component, of course, because COVID has driven so much online. And many of the teams mentioned that the breadth of the public input that you can get by doing online engagement oftentimes exceeds what you can do when you get people in a room. With that being said, there's obviously a need to do in-person engagement. So it will involve both forms, and there will be surveys, stakeholder groups, interviews with likely with focus groups. And like Brian said, the 3 teams that were interviewed range from 12 to 18 months. So the beginning stages will just be data gathering, meeting with staff, meeting with the steering committee, and then public engagement will ramp up toward probably a couple months into the process.
Can you say who you chose? Who will be doing it?
That has not been finalized yet. I'm sorry.
Jason, I would say after the 3 interviews, I think there were top 2 that clearly came to the fore, and it's really just parsing through the kind of final details about either of their proposals.
Next month, you'll have that decision made?
I anticipate that the decision will be made within the next week.
But I mean, at our next meeting, you'll
Yes,
know. Yeah.
absolutely. And then I'll just note that as part of the process, the selection committee will be issuing a memo or a report that will go to the public, but county council, county commissioners, you, the redevelopment commission, and area plan commission, outlining the process from when we basically started the work to release the RFP to the recommendation to the county commissioners of which consultant to select. And that will be made public. So
I'd just say too, from an appropriation standpoint, Abby, maybe you just want to give the range of the proposal cost, because at the end of the day, there was parity there. It wasn't kind of too crazy. So from an appropriation standpoint, I think between us and between the council, it's appropriate to move forward with the appropriations now, regardless of who wins in the end.
Abby, this is Tom. I have just a comment, probably a question in there somewhere. This is our second go at it. I know we've done a plan in the past, and I just want to make sure we don't make the same mistakes, and maybe they weren't mistakes, but the perceived mistakes of the first go around. And it comes down to the way we get public input. If anything's going to crater this thing, it's going to be the perception by the community that we are more introspective and not outgoing enough to engage with the community in a meaningful way. That's key, meaningful way. So I'd like to encourage the selection committee, as you go through the process, look for the consultant that will attack the public outreach differently, meaning more aggressively and more consistently, to make sure we get more buy-in, broader buy-in, deeper buy-in from the community, because this is going to be an emotional topic. Okay, that's why we've taken a half step back. Okay, and if we just do it the same way, using the same processes, we will get the same result. And I don't want to waste $250,000 for a product that is not worthy of moving forward.
Tom, I will vigorously head nod, and I will say that so there were a number of proposals that the selection committee read through that, although they had a public engagement component in it, it just wasn't anywhere near what I think we felt was necessary. And I'll just be candid and say that during the interview process for the finalists, Councilwoman Hess from the County Council and myself were quite pointed and not shy about asking the teams to explain in quite a lot of detail the level to which they were willing to go and needed to go to get that public input. And I shared a lot of what we've heard at commission meetings from members of the public and explained, like, look, you're going to come in here to a situation that's already pretty, engaged from the public perception, and we need to like understand where that's coming from, how it's evolved on down the line. And the teams I think that we felt were the best were the ones that took those concerns most seriously and had the most robust plan for that engagement, which really looks like online component to include surveys as well as just meetings and town halls, also an in-person component, and then some even had kind of a separate web component where folks could share feedback in kind of a real-time way. So there were a host of approaches to engaging the public in an equitable way that wasn't just one part of the county versus another, but as broadly inclusive as possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian.
Fantastic.
Are there any further questions on this?
I would note for the commissioners that Abby will be in front of the council tonight asking for the other half of the appropriation. So today is kind of the funding day for this project, so to speak.
So what is the total price? We're approving, we're asking to be to approve 250. What's the total price?
250 is also being requested by, from the county council for a total of 500,000. Now, I will say admittedly that the proposals, all three of them, who were interviewed are significantly lower than that. However, we want, to your point about public input, we want to make sure that whichever proposal we select, we get what we want. So if there needs to be a little bit of negotiation or an amendment to perhaps increase public input or look more closely at our zoning ordinance, we want flexibility to be able to do that. So the request before you is a do not exceed amount of 250, but in reality, I would anticipate that we wouldn't go the full amount.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
If there are no other questions, I will happily make a motion to approve that appropriation.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jason. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Abby, will you be presenting to the council tonight yourself?
Yeah, so the request already went to committee at their last meeting, and the actual vote is tonight. Yes.
Perhaps letting them know that we unanimously approved it could be a good thing to mention.
Thank you. Yes, noted.
Thank you, Abby.
Yep.
All right, Bill, you want to jump back up to economic development area updates?
Certainly, I'll turn this over to Chris to talk through the budget elements.
Yep, so before you, this morning is the budget for April. As I go back to, when we look at the budget narrative, I've broken it down into those major categories again, similar to last month. So the allocation area, there were some legal services, financial services for prospect modeling, some work related regarding the FAA RPZ application that we have in for the realignment of the South Shore. There's been a lot of work being done on Capitol Avenue with Capitol Avenue Corridor Trailways Visioning. We had a couple of pretty higher priced consultant items on that contract this month. And then just kind of general redevelopment commission, some of the disposition and easement requests for outlots B and C at the airport, as well as some work on the tax abatements that are going through right now. If there are any questions, be happy to answer them.
Hey, Chris, just because it's not on here, do you have an update on the Capitol Avenue Trail project?
I would send that over back to Bill.
So responding to that, yes, we have two different projects out right now. One is some design elements for specific elements of the trail. So Capitol Avenue between the bridge and Jefferson. Those plans and specs should be completed here shortly. A little segment of trail on Capitol or next to Lincoln Way from Capitol to Riviera Drive, and then also Capitol to Current Road on McKinley. Both of those are, we had to do some additional survey work on those, so that work is done. So we should have at least plans and specs for the capital section, or the section from Bridge to Jefferson done. The other segments are in the process of being finished up. We've got a neighborhood meeting we want to set with the neighbors in the Riviera Drive neighborhood to talk with a couple different alternatives there, and we're meeting with the city on Thursday to talk through that concept a little bit. So we should be in a position to have some conversation about next steps for funding of that project. Right now, Capitol Avenue, and we've got several Capitol Avenue projects that we'll talk about here later that talk about funding. So we're just going to need to talk about priority of next steps of funding some of those things. So the other piece of that, though, is a visioning study that we were working on. Information is being gathered with that, and I know that they're in the process of getting GIS maps put together so that they can start doing some pre-development on the visioning study.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And Bill, the next item in terms of overlapping taxing notifications?
Yeah, so every year, the Redevelopment Commission is required to make a presentation and make an offer to all the underlying taxing units. So last year, we did this presentation in December. Typically, we do it in June. COVID kind of moved our typical calendar around a little bit. So I would request for your permission to advertise to the underlying taxing units for a presentation for the June meeting. Mr. Dalton, who's seated to my right, screen left, would be making that presentation. So we'd ask for your approval to do that meeting in June, please.
Any questions on that? Otherwise, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Seconded.
Thank you, Jason. Dennis, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay.
Thank you. Dropping down, Bill, New Carlisle?
Certainly. So the first item under the New Carlisle items is a request permission to rezone 3 properties owned by the Redevelopment Commission. Those properties are at the northeast corner of Willow and State Road 2. We had previously gone through a rezoning process with those properties. It was unsuccessful 6 months ago. Conditions have changed. We believe that a rezoning for those properties would be favorable this time around, or we would anticipate that they would be more favorable. We've included in the packet a set of written zoning commitments that would be similar to all the other rezonings being done out in that area. We would ask for your permission to file the rezoning request and also the written commitments, and we would file those for the May filing. It would go to area plan and council in June for final discussion and approval in July. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Bill, did you say that going back, we changed certain things in the request or more detail? I didn't understand that
Yeah,
part.
so we actually added more detail in the written zoning request. That was one of the complaints, is that the zoning request, or the written commitments didn't match the other written commitments in the area. And that was more just an oversight and just between the council and us with what they were asking for. So we believe this time around that, again, with that change and just some changes in the larger conversation about what's happening in the IEC, that adding these 3 properties to this larger rezoning area should move favorably through.
Thank you.
Yep. I would also note that the reason we're seeking to rezone these is as we have nearly finished all the information that we need for site certification, having these properties zoned properly or zoned to I would be consistent with the site certification request that we would seek to file this summer.
Bill, one of the comments I heard come from the council during that meeting was that, there was like this overall feeling of there's a lot of property out there properly zoned right now. Why don't we have developers there before we rezone more property? If that's the same response that you get, what will you plan to respond to that?
Well, and again, I think one of the things we've seen here recently, just with lead requests that have come through, one of the concerns as we file those lead requests is having that buffer of ag land in the corner creates complications for some of the lead response. If we were going to include those properties in a sale to a prospect, again, it creates some complications as far as mixed uses that are non-compatible. So having everything zoned the same, again, I believe makes the site, the larger site, the IEC site 1, just more compatible for development. So again, it's 24 acres, so it would add 24 acres more to that industrial zoning, but it makes the area more consistent and blocks it in.
Are there any additional rezoning necessary to achieve what you're trying to get to with this one?
No, so this would be the final rezoning that really is necessary in a block of rezonings. We actually do have a rezoning in front of the council tonight for some property up at the southwest corner of Edison and Larison. That would finish off the IEC Site 2 area. This would finish off IEC Site 1, this rezoning request that we'd seek to file. So it really is really the last request that we would anticipate filing for rezoning in the near term.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Dennis. Do I have a second? I'll go ahead and second it. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Jason, thank you.
So the next item on the agenda, there's really two that are related to each other. They're both related. They're appraisal service requests. Back in 2016, the Redevelopment Commission, pre-IEC, was working on two main projects. One was a study of regional detention in the New Carlisle Economic Development Area. The second project was a rail study and the ability to introduce Norfolk Southern Rail into the New Carlisle Economic Development Area. As part of work done back then, Norfolk Southern, in addition to Ken Hersig and Associates, now Donahue and Associates, and the Redevelopment Commission were under contract to work together to design a rail lead track into the development area. As part of that work, we had appraised several properties. 3 properties in particular now rise to a point as we look to, again, continue to look to introduce rail into the area. Parcel 1, Parcel 2, and Parcel 4. These were properties that were appraised back in 2016, but due to economic conditions and due to acquisitions around the area, we would need to do updated appraisals if we were going to seek to acquire those properties. And in fact, and specifically in Parcel 1 and Parcel 4, we only actually received one appraisal, and then we did a review appraisal. State law would require the Redevelopment Commission to obtain 2 independent appraisals if it was to seek to acquire property. So the proposal before you today is to update appraisals or actually seek new appraisals on those 3 properties. We're actually using 2 new appraisers than we used in 2016. And then kind of a related request is to update a valuation of 51650 Larison Boulevard. The proposal before you today, there's 2 proposals, one from Iverson Grove and one from appraisal specialists. And if there's any questions about those appraisals, I would be happy to answer them.
How did you choose those 2 as opposed to other appraisers?
So part of the challenge is there really is a limited pool of appraisers especially that do work in St. Joe County, but just that are available to do work. A lot of them are doing bank appraisal work. And so as we've approached the appraisal community, they're just from a staffing and time standpoint, there are very few that have capacity to do work. The other thing with both of these appraisers, they're both MAI appraisers, so they have a higher level of certification than some of the other appraisers. Several are working to obtain a certification, but these 2 have it. We've used these 2 appraisers in the past. They consistently have valuations that, excuse me, are at a tolerance point that we feel they do very good work and do good value for the Redevelopment Commission.
Thank you.
The owners of the land, Bill, they're all privately owned. Well, one's publicly owned by the town of New Carlisle.
Correct.
So if we were to develop these, would we be purchasing them at some point?
Yeah, that would be
That would be the next step?
the next step in the process, yes. And we actually have had conversations with all four of the property owners, the three in the rail corridor, we've worked with for years and just had never pulled the trigger on those. Or we had tried on parcel 2, the one owned by Kim and Ken Houston, but just couldn't get to a valuation that made sense for either party. And then, so it's just a matter of, again, with the town and with shared assets, just getting updated numbers so that everybody's comfortable with current values.
Are these all inside the core development area?
So they're not only within the core development area, but they're also on our acquisition list. So they're in both situations, they're covered in the planning process.
No more questions from me. Thanks, Brian.
Anyone else? Could I have a motion?
Motion to approve, Brian.
I'll go ahead and motion for their separate approvals as well, items 1 and 2. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Thank you. Boundary changes, Bill?
So one of the things that staff is required to do before it's able to legally present any proposed boundary changes to a development area is request approval to study those potential boundary changes. We have a couple of boundary changes for the New Carlisle Economic Development Area that may be necessitated by development projects or by other development goals in the area. So the staff would request the ability to study potential boundary changes and then make a report to the Redevelopment Commission if there is a need to move forward on those. So staff would request approval to do that.
Why do you need approval to study boundary changes as a staff, Bill?
So it's based on the way the state law is, that's the first step in the process. So instead of just us bringing you a resolution that says, here's a change to the development area, we have to ask for that approval to make that consideration.
What would
So
you,
obviously you're doing this in order to prepare to change the boundaries. Can you give us a sense of what the big picture plan is, please?
So certainly, there's one development project on the northern end of the site that may require being included into the development area for purposes of a development agreement. There's on the southern end along State Road 2, as we continue to get design improvement concepts for the intersection of 2 and Larison. The development area ends before it gets all the way to Snowberry Road, so there's the potential to need to add some property to the development area for that purpose. So again, we're going to study the area. We're going to give you a report that says, if after study we deem that there's a need to do that, we would give you a report that would highlight those needs, and then that would allow us then to move forward if we find a reasonable need to make those changes.
and this is outside of the comprehensive plan
Correct,
planning.
correct.
Further questions? May I have a motion? I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Dennis is muted.
I think Dennis is muted if Dennis is,
Dennis, was that a second? Yep. Thanks. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
I'm opposed.
Thank you, Jason. Bill, dropping down to AM General EDA?
yeah, so this is probably the most exciting item, these next two on the agenda. Before you today is Resolution 2021-11 and a consent of landlord agreement. These are both related to Electric Last Mile Solution, or ELMS, pending purchase of the SF Motors property, which is the former H2 facility on McKinley Avenue. Years ago, back in 2000, as part of the larger project to lure General Motors to build the H2 in St. Joe County. The Redevelopment Commission purchased 52 properties and aggregated those properties to serve as a parking area and vehicle storage area on the eastern side of the site, basically abutting Schmucker football field in the eastern part of that development area. The Redevelopment Commission has held onto that property and leased that property to the owners of the site. We actually have a I believe at the time it was a 50-year lease, so our current lease expires in 2051. That lease before 2017 was with AM General. That lease transferred. We went through steps with the Redevelopment Commission to transfer that property to SF Motors, now Series Motors. When in 2017, 2018, it looked like SF Motors was going to build cars at that facility. SF Motors is in the process of selling the land to Electric Last Mile Solutions as part of a series of steps that are occurring this month. These actions before you today, this resolution and the consent, are necessary for their acquisition process. So basically what needs to happen is SF Motors will retain the property, but is asking for a sublease of the property to be able to sublease the property to Electric Last Mile Solutions until such time, I believe it's 23 months, until such time as the land contract between Elms and SF Motors is completed. At any point in time, if Electric Last Mile Solutions purchases the property in total before, the property then would transfer to Electric Last Mile Solutions. They would then be our lessee for the remainder period of the lease. We get approximately $72,000 a year for the lease of the property. We've had conversations with Electric Last Mile Solutions that once they own the property, they would seek to purchase the property so that we wouldn't have to go through a yearly collections process to get that check. Instead, we'd be able to just sell the land and get out of land ownership on that parcel. This is an exciting step because this step, again, is a series of steps. They anticipate having this property deal in total closed by the end of the month, going public by the end of the month. Once they have possession of the property, then they can move into the building, start hiring employees. More of the workforce, they have some employees already on staff, but not allowed to be in the building. So they would be able to be in the building, be able to employ staff, be able to bring product in and start producing vehicles. They anticipate producing the first round of vehicles yet this year, early fall. I would note for the record, there are no other incentives that the county is offering for this project. So back in 2018, when the Redevelopment Commission, the Council and Board of Commissioners did a development agreement with SF Motors, we did a fairly short-term but fairly healthy tax abatement for the $20+ million being invested of personal property into the site. Because there will not be a tax abatement on that site, new investment then will be collected by the TIF, and so that will end up providing new revenue for the development area. So this is a $238 million project where the county's only commitment is to transfer a piece of land that we have a 50-year lease on. So it's a huge win for the area. Ultimately could, in total, once they're up to full production, have 900+ employees. So this is a great win for the community, and all we're asking for is for your approval of this resolution and consent. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Both Jamie Woods and Phil Garrett were instrumental in putting these documents together, so they would be able to answer any technical legal questions you may have.
Questions from any of the commission members?
Would there be any possibility of charging a transfer fee to accommodate this request?
You could certainly ask for a transfer fee, Mr. Gripe, as part of the transaction, if that's the will of the commission.
I'm just throwing that out in that it is a good project, and there might be an opportunity for the taxpayers to benefit from it, even if it's in a modest way.
That would be an economic policy decision that this commission would need to make as to if it wanted to proceed with a request of a transfer fee. Discuss that with the folks at Electric Mile Solutions, since they would ultimately be paying it.
Jamie,
Again,
that would
that's-
require redoing the development agreement, I imagine.
I'm not certain. I think as part of the consent, that we could have language in the consent agreement that upon the closing of the transaction and the purchase of the building by Last Mile Solutions, upon completion of the purchase, then in addition to the consent of the landlord, there would be a payment to the county in X amount for said consent. I think that's how it would be structured. I don't think it would require redoing the development agreement necessarily with SF Motors.
What does the other commissioners think? I just threw that out there. I wonder what everybody else is thinking about it.
I mean, as far as incentives go, I would just say past experiences, this is a pretty good deal from a county perspective, given what's at stake currently. I think if there were other incentives at play, Tom, I'd be much more inclined to push for that. But in the current circumstance, I don't know that it's as necessary as it might be in others.
How likely is it that they'd say no?
I think we'd have to figure out how that transfer fee is valued. The other thing too, from a timing standpoint, they need this action to close this week, so we'd need to get back to them and then schedule a special meeting if that was the direction that the redevelopment commission wanted to go, so.
The way we understand the transaction, Jason, is there's certain Securities and Exchange Commission filings that they need to have submitted expeditiously, and part of those filings will be showing that they have the ability to have control over this land upon payment of the purchase price to SF Motors, which is substantial, by the way.
I might also just suggest that Tom, I actually think this is a very interesting idea, and I wonder if it's not better put into some sort of policy rather than having it be kind of a one-off or an ad hoc action.
Agreed.
So I might just say to Bill and crew and team that as we go forward with these types of transactions, or either, any kind of transactions where the county and land is involved, that we look at that, and if it makes sense to have a policy in place, setting up what that transaction fee would look like, how it would be valued, and what those steps would entail, so that it's not something that's just perceived as arbitrary by developers or business community. I would say that should be something we should look at.
Agreed.
Totally agree. Totally agree. We need to consider it on all deals going forward when there's an opportunity to extract value for the taxpayers.
So Bill, I might just ask that Megan note for the June meeting, that maybe if there's any conclusions you've reached with respect to a policy of that nature, that maybe we have an update or discussion on that. For present purposes, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution as it is today.
I'll second. That's a motion? I'll second.
Yeah. All those in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? No. Okay, thank you.
We would also need approval of the consent agenda, just please.
Okay. I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the consent of landlord.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is a project, actually, the next two agenda items are project updates. The project update for the Elkhart and Western Railroad Crossing project, we've worked with Elkhart and Western Railroad since they came to the community back. The railroad's been here for a long time, but new ownership bought the railroad. Pioneer Railroad bought the Elkhart and Western Railroad line back in late 2019. As part of an increase of activity on the line, they added stop signs to all the crossings, all 5 crossings along the corridor, their corridor area, which is really from Bittersweet east to the county line. As part of an agreement with Elkhart and Western Railroad, we agreed to participate in crossing upgrades at County Line or Ash and Bittersweet. Those improvements will start Monday. They will start first at the Bittersweet crossing and take a little less than a week, and then move over to the Ash Road crossing. We'll add bells and lights and improve crossing structures, so the crossing itself will be improved. So that work is set to get underway. Since they moved to the community, they originally were a 3-day-a-week railroad that operated. They're now 5 days a week. We've seen increased activity on the line. We've seen a couple of businesses move into the corridor here into the development area in a couple of cases to use their rail services. So this partnership is a good opportunity. Having rail serve sites is a real win for the area. And so we're excited to see this move forward, but I wanted to give you that as a project update. The next item on the agenda is the Penn Township Fire Station. At our last Redevelopment Commission meeting, we had a proposal before you, or actually a resolution, to approve up to $500,000 of funds for the fire station project. The work was going to be used to do site work as well as infrastructure improvement as part of the site. As part of the design of the site, it was determined that the fire station, based on county engineering codes, could exit to McKinley, but needed to have a return that was not necessarily part of the footprint of the site. And I apologize, I don't have a drawing to put on the screen, but what ended up happening was Candace Lane, which sits just a little east of the fire station site, was determined to be a good cross intersection that would allow trucks to return into the site and allow for development occur. So the Redevelopment Commission picked up a lot of the pre-development costs to do the site work at the site, picked up the design cost to design Candace Lane, as well as future traffic signal improvements at Candace Lane and McKinley. And as part of the work, agreed to cover some of the site expenses for the site development and for the construction of the roadway. That amount came to $479,000. The Redevelopment Commission at its last meeting approved $500,000 for those improvements. We knew that there was some additional costs that needed to be covered for the site. We had known that we were going to have additional conversations about ways that could be paid for in partnership with Penn Township. One of those ways is the American Rescue Plan. There's the opportunity to use some of those costs to cover public safety and public health costs. And so actually, as recently as last night, the federal government released some additional guidelines on how American Rescue Plan money can be used. So we're examining additional ways that money could move forward to pay for additional costs, perhaps in this project. So we had approved, or the Redevelopment Commission had approved the resolution. It went to the Board of Commissioners on April 20th. Due to some additional information gathered 13 hours before the meeting, the Board of Commissioners tabled the agenda request. We have not gotten all the additional information we need. We need to get some clarification on some numbers, and we will be working with our partners at Penn Township to get some clarification on some of those numbers. But just wanted to let you know that at this point in time, we're still working on some funding issues on this project and just trying to get some clarity on what final costs may be needed to move that project to completion. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Bill. That was really comprehensive. And thanks, Brian, for adding this to the agenda last minute. I'm sure everybody's been hearing from our friends in Penn Township. And it seemed to be that they were concerned that we were not going to fulfill our commitment that we passed last month. And it sounds like there might be some confusion on their end, and they're just not clear of the process. So in the end, our commitment for the $500,000 is fulfilled on our end. Now it's up to your work with the commissioners to see it through.
That's correct. And that's, again, even had we had, so you approved your action on Tuesday, the 13th. We got the information on the 19th. We would have had to table the item anyway and send it back to the Redevelopment Commission. If we were going to ask for your approval of additional funds, the Board of Commissioners couldn't have made that approval. So again, we're going to work through some of their numbers, trying to figure out where we can get some cost efficiencies and get some of these things paid for. But we'll bring you back a report in June and work to get this all clarified so that that project can be completed, so.
Okay, but I mean, our commitment as the redevelopment commission at this point is sort of fulfilled unless they come back and there's more things.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah, Bill, I think my understanding, so the $500,000 that was appropriated by the commission in April, that can still be taken up and approved by the commission as it is. The challenge would be any new funding that would be sought from a TIF would have to come before the redevelopment commission as a separate and new appropriation. My understanding is that the federal dollars in the American Rescue Act are those that can be pursued for this. And obviously, any chance we have to use federal dollars first, that would make much more sense. And that wouldn't be a decision we would necessarily make, I don't assume, but those would be dollars that you and the commissioners could spend as you saw fit.
Yes, absolutely. And again, that's why I made the comment earlier in the meeting as it related to some of the Capitol Avenue improvements. Until we can look at the full budget and understand where we may seek to use additional redevelopment commission funds to help the fire station project move forward, we're going to look comprehensively at the budget and give you a full report in June.
no, and that's helpful and that makes total sense to me. I think the message got muddied that they thought that we were like soft on, on the project all of a sudden, and it sounds like you're fully committed to it, seeing it through. It's just a matter of where's it going to come from. So I think it's good for folks to hear that everybody's still on board with it.
Yep. I think it's the which bucket game, Jason, at this
Yeah.
point.
Makes sense.
Many buckets.
Good problem to have.
Yes. All right, Bill, Northwest Cleveland.
So we don't have any updates in.
Or, I'm sorry, Wyatt or
in
Northwest?
Wyatt or Northwest Cleveland.
Yep.
So skipping down to additional business, I would note that at the last meeting, there was a request to examine how many county-owned land parcels the county has. We started that process through GIS. We found that there is, I believe we found 367 parcels at this point in time, but are still looking to go through the records. Part of the challenge with the records, and Brian could attest to this through his time with the city, is that it may be under Board of Commissioners, it may be Commissioners, Board of, it may be, so we're scrubbing the parcel list to come up with everything. What we found in a lot of cases is for example, in the core development to the IEC, there's 67 parcels, we believe, that are either owned by the Board of Commissioners or the Redevelopment Commission. Several of those are right-of-way that had just never been dedicated. So it's a matter of looking at each parcel, basically, and we're working with Parks Department to go through the list. And so at the next meeting in June, and if we can get through the list, we'll certainly give you a start of a list. We tried to map all of the parcels, but it just was a bunch of big dots on the map that didn't make a lot of sense. So we're going to start to cull through that, get that cleaned up, and get you a report on that in June.
Bill, I think that's great. I look forward to getting that list next month. But to keep the problem from repeating, how do we coordinate with the commissioners and all other parties so that we have a comprehensive list so that we don't have to go scrambling again? We can go to a single source to find out county-owned parcels and who actually controls that.
So what we found is that there's 4 different people that had versions of the list. There was a list for mowing, there was a list for snow plowing, there was a list for, property acquisition list. There were, so we're trying to, again, as we find the different lists, figure out who's got what responsibility to add information to the list. So I think we're going to have to do some internal controls as far as how we can monitor that. We have a lot of properties that we have title to within the city of South Bend and some within the city limits of Mishawaka. If they don't have a drainage component or other reasons why we should own it, those are properties that should be offloaded in coordination to the cities. So again, I think we're going to find a lot of this kind of stuff, and again, we will use our GIS department ultimately to be the caretaker of this list as we move forward.
Okay, so to summarize, then, at the end of the day, the GIS department will be instructed to manage and keep a comprehensive list of all county-owned properties.
That will be the targeted department. I haven't confirmed that at the commissioner level, but it seems like that would be the most sense as they manage our property records for us.
It's one thing to clean up a mess, but it's the other thing to keep repeating it. So I just want to make sure at the end of this exercise that you guys are putting a lot of time and effort on, you don't have to repeat it again.
No, that's absolutely. That's exactly where we need to be when we're done with this, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Just really quick comment. I would 100% agree with that, having gone through GIS nightmares before. And I would just say, Bill, it's opportune time, just given that the GIS folks are going to be heavily involved with the comprehensive planning effort. So to the extent that we can have a lot of that keyed up and accurate for them, it'll be helpful. But then also they might be able to shed some light on how, other places across the country do this type of work and where it's housed and who has access to it and the controls Tom was talking about. So this is an opportune moment to undertake that project, as painful as it might be.
Certainly, I think related to that too, one of the things, again, we see that a lot of these properties are right-of-way that just have never been dedicated. So as we do construction projects, whether it's Douglas Road or some of these others as we move forward, just completing that last step, dotting all the i's and crossing all the t's and dedicating the property so that it's right-of-way instead of a series of parcels that don't connect to that, so.
Okay. Any other additional business at this point?
I don't know if anybody has an update on the MetroNet or the Choice Life project going out to New Carlisle, and then how we're going to work with other partners to connect hospitals, schools, et cetera, government buildings to that. Any update on that, Bill?
We've got just a quick construction update. I provided the EDA with a quarterly and a financial report a couple weeks back. We are at least at that point in time, we were at about 52,000 linear feet of cable laid. I think they were almost done with State Road 2, and then earlier last week, I believe they did the underneath around the South Shore and Norfolk Southern lines on Ray Street. I think they had flaggers out and everything to do that construction down there. From a EDA standpoint regarding the helping out libraries and businesses, we haven't had conversations this past month about that. I know Choice Light is engaging with Surf Broadband. I know, we're trying to figure out some business customers, and, we've provided some residential kind of where the loop will go, and looking at, especially since we did the bid for the New Carlisle Town Loop. So we're working on kind of what the design looks like, but haven't gone really in depth yet on how we can bridge that gap through funding to help out the libraries and things like that. We haven't just had time to reach out to those yet.
Could I ask that you put it on the agenda for next month, please?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tom. Any additional business? Seeing none, on to public comment. For anyone on the call wishing to make any public comment, please unmute yourself, name and address for the record, and we'd ask that you adhere to the 3-minute time limit.
Dan Caruso, 305 Compton Street, New Carlisle. In the resolution to limit the core development area of the IEC to the area between US 20 and State Road 2 north to south and Willow and Snowberry east to west, the county agreed to pull areas north of 20, south of 2 off of the original zoning request last summer. Just to get the Olive Township trustees, the New Carlisle Town Council, to buy into their plans. Now the county has showed their hand and proven they can't be trusted, not just for their word, but for a written and signed, mutually agreed to contract. I hope our local officials now understand that you can't make deals with people who have no regard for promises and contracts, and even less regard for local residents. It's time for this area to make the necessary steps to secede from St. Joseph County. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Dan. Any other public comments?
Yes, I'd like to make one if you could. John Van Bruini, retired fire chief of Penn Township Fire Department. My address is excuse me?
Go ahead.
Oh, my address is 15250 Kern Road, Mishawaka, Indiana. I'm talking in reference to the fire station project, which I have been involved in from the very start and still am actually as a consultant to the township. My question is to Mr. Shalio in reference to the additional funding other than the 500,000 that we talked about in the Candace Lane project. Do you have a figure for what funding you may be asking for through that Rescue Act?
So I guess I can answer that. The request was for an additional $540,314. And again, I don't know that we have a good itemized budget of what that 540 looks like. So we'll be requesting that of Penn Township over the next couple of weeks so that we can bring back some information to you at your next meeting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everything you guys have done for us and looking forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Martha Ray, 29360 Lynn Street, New Carlisle. I just wanted to let you know, I have a friend named Kim who works at Surf Broadband, and she told me that residential hookup for this dark fiber that's coming out is free to residents up to 250 feet of driveway. And then it's only 75 cents a foot after that if you have a really long. But I just wanted to let you know that residents, I don't know about businesses, but residents are going to get hooked up for free up to 250 feet. That's all.
Chris, be nice to confirm that to Tom's point at the June discussion, if that is in fact the case. That's.
Yep, will do.
Thank you, Martha. Any others? All right, seeing none, I'd entertain.
This is
go
Andrew
ahead.
Avery,
Yep.
1515 East Ewing Avenue. I'd also like to second the chief of Penn Township's request for us to get together and talk about additional funding for that. It sounds like you guys are on top of it for the additional amount. And we appreciate you guys working with us together for the community services and public safety. And it's so important to continue to provide the services to Penn Township. And we'd like for you guys to continue to work with us and those additional fundings for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Last call. All right, now seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you, everyone. We'll see you in June.